On June 22, 1941, at 11:45 a.m., in an office located in Bauman Lane in Moscow, the locum tenens of the patriarchal throne, Metropolitan Sergiy Stragorodsky, completed work on a document that officially became known as the Epistle to the Pastors and Flock of Christ's Orthodox Church. The text was typed on a mechanical Underwood typewriter in 3 copies. The original document lacked an outgoing registration number from the Chancery of the Moscow Patriarchate. This fact is explained by the complete liquidation of the administrative and technical apparatus of church governance during the pre-war secularization campaigns. The hierarch's signature was affixed in violet ink on a sheet of standard writing paper without watermarks. This document recorded the official position of the religious organization before the party and state leadership of the USSR made a public address to the population. The official radio broadcast of the speech by the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, Ivan Vasilievich Stalin, took place only on July 3, 1941, meaning the church administration was chronologically ahead by 11 days. Copies of the epistle were reproduced on rotators and hectographs using artisanal methods. They were dispatched via couriers to the addresses of active parishes. At the time this document was composed, fewer than 4,000 Orthodox churches were functioning within the territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. For comparison, as of 1917, their number exceeded 54,000. Before proceeding to a detailed analysis of the archival documents, logistical chains, and financial reports of this large-scale campaign, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps develop the Documentary Chronicle project and conduct regular research in state and departmental archives. The military-economic potential of the Russian Orthodox Church by the summer of 1941 was determined by the legal status established by the decree of the Council of People's Commissars of January 23, 1918, on the separation of church from state and school from church. According to this regulatory act, religious societies did not possess the rights of a legal entity. They did not have the legal right to own property. All church buildings, utensils, and working capital were nationalized property and were transferred to communities of believers for use under agreements with local councils of workers' deputies. Religious organizations were deprived of the right to open current accounts in the State Bank of the USSR for conducting centralized economic activity. The only form of accumulating financial resources remained the treasuries of parish councils, formed from voluntary donations, the sale of candles, and the performance of rites. The management of these funds was strictly controlled by local financial bodies of the People's Commissariat of Finance and instructors for religious affairs attached to local executive committees. The personnel of the highest hierarchy was reduced to a critical minimum. Only 4 permanent bishops remained at liberty and in the exercise of their duties: Metropolitan Sergiy Stragorodsky in Moscow, Metropolitan Alexei Simansky in later blockaded Leningrad, Archbishop Nicholas Yarushevich in Kiev, and Metropolitan Sergiy Voskresensky in the Baltics. The official number of registered clergy was about 5,500 people. The economic situation of the parishes was complicated by a system of progressive taxation. The income tax on the earnings of clergy under Article 19 of the Edict of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR reached 65 to 80% of the total receipts. Despite these restrictions, the infrastructure of the parishes retained a high degree of mobilization readiness due to the preservation of informal connections among believers and the high density of the religious population in rural areas. The state financial system as of June 22, 1941, did not have approved budget classification codes for accepting wholesale payments from religious associations for defense needs. The situation required the rapid creation of emergency mechanisms for interaction between the People's Commissariat of Finance, Narkomfin, the state bank, and the Moscow Patriarchate. Here, the first systematic discrepancy in archival sources is revealed, indicating an organizational planning error at the intersection of departments. The reports of the Central Administration of the USSR State Bank for the third quarter of 1941 record large sums of money received from groups of citizens, without indicating their religious affiliation. Simultaneously, the incoming document logs of the Moscow Patriarchate contain receipts for the deposit of cash funds in regional bank branches directly by church rectors. Local NKVD organs and financial inspectors on the ground, guided by the 1929 instruction on religious associations, in the first months of the war, often blocked attempts by parish councils to officially transfer money under the church's name. They demanded that the funds be processed as individual contributions from separate collective farmers or workers. This created a distortion in the initial union-wide statistics of the Defense Fund, understating the real contribution of church structures to the overall supply system of the Red Army during the summer-autumn campaign of 1941 by approximately 35 to 40%. Only after the issuance of Secret Directive No. 142 by Narkomfin was the procedure for accepting valuables from religious communities unified. The mechanism for centralized collection of funds was launched after the normalization of administrative contacts between the country's leadership and the church leadership. On December 30, 1942, Metropolitan Sergiy sent a government telegram to the chairman of the State Defense Committee. The text contained a request to permit the opening of a special account at the state bank to accumulate targeted contributions for the construction of the Dmitry Donskoy tank column. A return telegram signed by Stalin was published in the newspaper Pravda on January 5, 1943. This document became the legal basis for lifting restrictions on the financial operations of religious organizations. A special sub-account was allocated for the collection of funds within the All-Union Defense Fund. Parish councils received the right to legally collect cash funds and deposit them into the accounts of district branches of the state bank with the issuance of official receipts of the established form. The flow of funds was controlled by the Council for the Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church under the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, created later in September 1943. The director of this body was State Security Colonel Georgy Grigorievich Karpov. The campaign to raise funds for the tank column demonstrates the high rate of mobilization of internal parish resources. In Moscow, the Epiphany Cathedral accumulated over 400,000 rubles in cash within the first 3 weeks of the collection. In blockaded Leningrad, where the daily bread ration for workers was 250 grams and for employees and dependents 125 grams, St. Nicholas Naval Cathedral and Prince Vladimir Cathedral had deposited 4,600,000 rubles into the state bank by the beginning of 1944. In Kuibyshev, which became the temporary capital, the Intercession Cathedral collected 2 million rubles in 1943. In the Gorky Diocese, the amount of collections exceeded 4 million rubles. Funds were collected not only in the rear areas, but also in the frontline zone. Believers of the Tashkent Diocese collected and transferred over 1 million rubles to the settlement accounts of the defense industry. The total amount of funds collected exclusively for the targeted program of building armored vehicles amounted to 8 million rubles by the spring of 1944. In addition to paper banknotes of the USSR State Bank, a significant amount of scrap, precious metals and jewelry was received at the collection points of Narkomfin. The total weight of silver items handed over in the form of icon settings, crosses, and church utensils amounted to 530 kilograms. Gold items were surrendered in the amount of 230 grams. These valuables were sent directly to the State Repository of Valuables, Gokran, for subsequent use in settlements for import purchases of scarce raw materials. During the implementation of the program to build a tank column, the second documented logistical planning error occurred. Financial funds from the Moscow Patriarchate were received into the accounts of the People's Commissariat of Finance in full by May 1943. However, the placement of the state order at the plants of the People's Commissariat of Tank Industry was delayed by 140 days. A study of the reports of the main supply directorate of the Red Army shows that plant number 112, Krasnoye Sormovo, and the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant operated according to strict quarterly plans of the State Supply Committee. In these plans, the limits for rolled armor plate, the supply of V-234 diesel engines, and observation instruments were allocated among regular military orders. The allocation of materials for the unscheduled Dmitry Donskoy column required a separate decree of the State Defense Committee. Such a decree, numbered GKO-4311, was signed with a significant delay. As a result, the armored vehicles were manufactured and transferred to the troops not in the summer of 1943, at the beginning of the Battle of Kursk, as planned by the church leadership, but only in March 1944. This led to the idle targeting of financial funds in accounts for almost half a year, amidst a shortage of equipment at the front. The equipment was manufactured at the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant. In total, 40 units of armored vehicles were produced using the funds of the faithful. In terms of technical composition, the column was divided into two types of vehicles. 19 units were medium tanks T-34-85, and 21 units were flamethrower tanks OT-34. The medium tank T-34-85 was a modification with significantly enhanced artillery armament. It was equipped with a ZISS-53 gun of 85 mm caliber with a barrel length of 54.6 calibers. The vehicle's crew increased to 5 people due to the introduction of a gunner, which freed the tank commander from the functions of aiming the gun and increased combat management efficiency. The turret armor was increased to 90 mm in the frontal part, and the vehicle's weight was 32 tons. The V-234 engine with 500 horsepower allowed for a highway speed of up to 55 kilometers per hour. The flamethrower tank OT-34 was designed based on the standard T-34 tank model 1942. Instead of the bow machine gun in the front hull plate, an automatic powder flamethrower ATO-42 was installed. The capacity of the fire mixture reservoir was 200 liters. This allowed for 20 fire shots at a distance of up to 100 meters when using a viscous mixture. The tank's main armament consisted of a 76 mm F-34 gun. On the turret sides of all 40 vehicles, the inscription Dmitry Donskoy was applied in white oil paint. The official handover ceremony took place on March 7, 1944. The venue for the event was chosen as a military camp near the village of Gorelki, located 5 kilometers northwest of Tula. Representing the Russian Orthodox Church at the ceremony was the chairman of the economic administration under the Holy Synod, Archbishop of Volokolamsk and Yurievsk, Nikolai Yarushevich. The armored vehicles were distributed between 2 regular army units. The 19 T-34-85 tanks were assigned to the 38th Separate Tank Regiment. According to organization chart number 010/460, this regiment was a separate unit and was used to reinforce rifle divisions. The 21 OT-34 flamethrower tanks were transferred to the 516th Separate Flamethrower Tank Regiment. This unit was organizationally part of the Assault Engineer Sapper Brigades of the RVGK, Reserve of the Supreme High Command, and was intended for breaking through heavily fortified enemy defense lines, suppressing long-term firing points, and conducting combat in urban conditions. The combat path of the materiel built with church donations is traced through the combat logs of the units. The 38th Separate Tank Regiment was included in the forces of the Second Ukrainian Front in March 1944. The regiment took part in the Uman-Botoshani offensive operation. In the conditions of the spring Rasputitsa, the tanks forded the southern Bug and Dniester rivers. The offensive was conducted within the operational zone of the 40th Army. According to the operational reports of the regiment's headquarters, in the period from March 15 to 28, 1944, vehicles bearing the inscription Dmitry Donskoy eliminated 14 enemy artillery pieces, 23 machine gun nests, and up to 2 battalions of manpower. During the crossing of the Prut River and the advance to the state border of the USSR, the regiment lost 6 vehicles to enemy artillery fire and technical malfunctions. The tanks remaining in service continued their movement towards the Romanian city of Iași. The 516th Separate Flamethrower Tank Regiment began combat operations in June 1944 as part of the First Belarusian Front. The regiment participated in the Lublin-Brest operation. During the breakthrough of the defensive line on the western Bug River, the flamethrower tanks operated in the first echelon of assault groups. The use of the AT-042 flamethrower proved highly effective in clearing trenches and strong points in the area of the city of Demblin. During the battles, the regiment expended 3,800 liters of flame mixture. In the process, flamethrower fire destroyed 12 pillboxes and 8 dugouts. By the time the regiment reached the approaches to Warsaw in August 1944, only 9 out of 21 OT-34 tanks were in combat-ready condition. The remaining vehicles were disabled or sent for major overhaul to tank repair plants in the rear. Worn and damaged components were replaced during scheduled repairs, but the original inscriptions on the armor were often not restored during repainting. This complicates the further separate identification of these vehicles in documents from late 1944 and early 1945. Parallel to the tank program, a fundraiser was carried out for the creation of combat aviation. The initiator of the project was Metropolitan Alexei Simansky, head of the Leningrad Diocese. The campaign was formally organized under the name Alexander Nevsky. The purpose of this program was to supply fighter aviation regiments of the Red Army Air Force with modern aircraft. The fundraising geography covered Siberia, the Urals, and the central regions of the RSFSR. The Krasnoyarsk Diocese, headed by Archbishop Luka Voino-Yasenetsky, contributed 230,000 rubles to this account during 1943. Furthermore, Archbishop Luka himself, who combined his church service with the position of Chief Surgeon of Evacuation Hospital No. 1515, transferred his first-class state prize of 130,000 rubles to the needs of the Defense Fund. The Novosibirsk Diocese accumulated 2,200,000 rubles for the needs of aircraft construction. The total amount of funds raised under the Alexander Nevsky program by the autumn of 1943 was over 30 million rubles. Consolidated statements of the People's Commissariat of Finance indicate that with this money, the aviation industry manufactured a squadron of LF-5 fighters numbering 12 units. The LF-5 aircraft, developed under the guidance of OKB-21, led by Semyon Alexeyevich Lavochkin, was a single-engine wooden monoplane. The fighter was equipped with a radial air-cooled M82 engine with 1,700 horsepower. Armament consisted of two synchronized 20mm SHVAK cannons with an ammunition load of 170 shells per barrel. The maximum speed of the aircraft at an altitude of 6,000 meters reached 648 kilometers per hour. The built aircraft were transferred to the 159th Fighter Aviation Regiment, which was part of the 275th Fighter Aviation Division of the 13th Air Army of the Leningrad Front. The aircraft performed tasks covering communications across Lake Ladoga and escorting IL-2 attack aircraft during the final lifting of the siege of Leningrad in January 1944. During the squadron's operational period, the regiment's pilots recorded 42 air battles with enemy aircraft, in which 18 aircraft of the BF-109 and FW-190 types were shot down. The squadron's personnel lost 7 aircraft in air battles and to anti-aircraft artillery fire. This part of the chronicle records a third archival historical discrepancy related to topographical features and the accounting of material supply under the conditions of the Leningrad Front. According to the official reports of the authorized representative of the Council for the Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church for the city of Leningrad, only 10 churches were active within the defensive perimeter. However, the financial ledgers of the Leningrad office of the State Bank for the fixed period of 1942 to 1943 contain entries for the receipt of large sums of cash from 14 separate church councils. A cross-analysis of the record shows that 4 sources of funds were located in the territories of suburban districts administratively subordinate to the Metropolitan of Leningrad but cut off from the city by the front line, including the Oranienbaum bridgehead. Money from there was delivered by military transport aircraft and boats of the Ladoga military flotilla, along with defense supplies. These operations were erroneously coded in military invoices as collections from partisan detachments or contributions from the civilian population of the coastal group of forces. This led to confusion in determining the exact volume of funds collected specifically by the structures of the Russian Orthodox Church within the blockade ring. In addition to funding heavy equipment and aviation, the structures of the Patriarchate conducted a continuous, systematic collection of funds to support the Red Army's sanitary service and social welfare. From 1941 to 1945, a program of patronage over hospitals was in operation. Parishes purchased food for wounded soldiers at collective farm markets and handed it over to quartermaster services. The Moscow parish of the Church of Elijah the Ordinary prepared and delivered to the city's hospitals more than 3 tons of dried vegetables and berries. The Vologda diocese collected for the needs of evacuation points 120,000 sets of underwear, 15,000 pairs of woolen socks, and 8,000 pairs of felt boots. In addition to material supplies, funds were collected for the maintenance of orphanages for children of deceased servicemen. A total of over 15 million rubles were processed through the central treasury of the Patriarchate under this expenditure item. The general financial record of all types of donations on behalf of the Church, recorded in the final report of the Council for the Affairs of the ROC to the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, dated May 12, 1945, recorded a figure of 300 million rubles. This sum does not include the value of material donations and food distributed directly, bypassing state bank accounts. A critical audit of the decisions of the command and state apparatus of that period shows that the large-scale inclusion of the church in the defense funding system was not a spontaneous decision. It was the result of a pragmatic calculation carried out within the framework of a change in the state's internal policy. Until 1943, the Soviet leadership viewed religious organizations solely as an object of fiscal suppression and administrative restraint. The situation changed when the protracted nature of hostilities required the mobilization of all available channels of influence on the population, including internal and external geopolitical factors. On the night of September 4th to 5th, 1943, a meeting took place in the Kremlin between Chairman of the Council of People's Commissars Stalin, People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs Vyacheslav Mikhailovich Molotov, and NKVD Colonel Georgy Grigorievich Karpov, with three metropolitans, Sergius, Alexis, and Nicholas. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 55 minutes. From the transcript of the conversation, kept in the State Archive of the Russian Federation, it follows that the initiative to change the format of relations came from the state leadership. During the meeting, decisions were made that violated the existing regulatory instructions of the departments, but were necessary for the operational management of resources. An analysis of the outcomes of this meeting through the prism of the Regulation on Religious Cults, then in force, reveals a profound transformation of the legal field of the USSR under the conditions of a state of emergency. The state made concessions that were previously considered impossible for ideological reasons. The church was permitted to convene a bishops' council to elect the Patriarch of Moscow and all Rus, which took place on September 8, 1943. The decision to open a theological institute and pastoral courses in Moscow was approved, which meant the legalization of a system for reproducing clergy personnel. An important economic consequence of the meeting was the permission to organize candle factories and workshops for the production of church utensils under diocesan administrations. This provided parishes with an autonomous source of income, a portion of which was guaranteed to be transferred to state target funds. Furthermore, the People's Commissariat of Finance received instructions to reduce the income tax rate for the clergy to a level comparable to the tax rates for cooperative artels and engineering technical workers, which automatically increased the volume of free funds remaining at the disposal of parish councils. The appointment of Georgy Karpov as head of the Council for the Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church meant transferring control over the church from the plane of direct, forceful suppression via the secret political directorate of the NKVD to the plane of coordinated state regulation and the utilization of its potential in the interests of foreign policy and the defense industry. The effectiveness of the new model of interaction is confirmed by the statistics of the growth of the network of active parishes. While only 14 churches were opened in the entire year of 1942 on the territory of the USSR, by permission of local authorities, 2,146 churches were opened in the fourth quarter of 1943 and throughout 1944 in liberated territories and in the rear areas of Siberia and Central Asia. The logistics of opening were regulated by joint decrees of the Council for the Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church and local regional executive committees. The main criterion for satisfying a petition from believers to open a parish became the financial solvency of the community and its readiness to fulfill planned obligations for the delivery of agricultural products, subscription to state war loans, and direct transfers to the defense fund. Thus, each newly opened church became a stronghold for fundraising, operating within a unified system of financial and economic support for the fighting army. The dry summary of the activities of the Russian Orthodox Church in the period from June 22, 1941 to May 9, 1945, is expressed in specific material and technical indicators that changed the structure of the Red Army's supply resources. The financial campaign allowed for the complete financing of the construction and commissioning of two major military formations, a tank regiment and an aviation squadron, with the total number of vehicles amounting to 52 units of modern combat machines. Direct monetary injections totaling 300 million rubles covered the state's expenses for the production, transportation, and maintenance of the equivalent of one infantry division over a year and a half of active combat operations. The surrender of 760 kilograms of scrap precious metals strengthened the gold and currency reserves of the People's Commissariat of Finance, used to secure foreign trade operations within the framework of Lend-Lease supplies. The change in state policy towards religious organizations, which occurred in September 1943, made it possible to eliminate the underground sector of the religious movement, transferring its financial flows under the direct control of the State Bank of the USSR. This minimized the risks of the enemy administration using the religious factor in the occupied territories and stabilized the country's internal rear. The Russian Orthodox Church occupied a fixed place in the mobilization structure of the Soviet state. This allowed the use of the organization's resources to achieve victory without altering the basic political structure of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.